Oh, this water's terrible. I knew I should have switched to diet water. It's a lot cheaper at the store anyway. Oh, hello there, students. My name is Mr. Bittner, and today I wanted to teach you guys about a learning strategy that can be implemented very well into any classroom setting, depending on the various subjects that we may get into, depending on how you guys take it. Today we are going to be investigating the RAFT strategy. Sorry there, everyone. That water there, way past its expiration date. But let's get into the fundamentals of what makes up RAFT. So what is a RAFT activity? A RAFT activity is a way for students to be expressive through writing and other literary means that encourages it rather than just being an outright test or quiz. It instead allows students to express knowledge through various forms, whether it be social studies, mathematics, science, you name the subject, you can make a RAFT activity out of it. It promotes writing amongst students, like I had mentioned previously, without the boring monotony of having to study for a test, but allows them to expand their knowledge on the subject, and they can demonstrate it right here in your classroom and in mine. The audience that they're conveying these thoughts to doesn't even directly have to be the teacher, as they're emphasizing it to anyone that they can think of, including themselves. They can demonstrate this knowledge to the best of their ability without having to worry about pressure, yet they learn more about this knowledge as time goes on. And as we'll demonstrate with certain topics that we may get into here, providing some examples that all of you can use within classroom settings, you'll find that a RAFT activity is a good excuse for a student to learn literary abilities, reading and writing comprehension, without having to worry about appeasing a teacher or going through a monotonous test. Now you're probably wondering to yourself, what does RAFT even stand for, aside from what uses a student could possibly get out of it in a classroom setting, and the various components that make RAFT possibly appealing to students? Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's certainly not a component to get you up the river, I can tell you that much. Trust me, I tried once, almost drowned, long story. The point that I'm trying to convey here to all of you is RAFT is composed of many different things as it is an acronym. So allow me to discuss that with all of you here, using my handy-dandy sheet here that I had prepped prior to the start of class today. Role of the writer is what R stands for. It is composed of the question, who are you as the writer? What is it that you want to tell everyone as the composer of this document? A is for audience. Who will be reading it? The most important thing when it comes to it isn't just what are you writing. It's not just the content. It's who are you trying to write this for? Is your target audience an auditorium of enthusiasts? Is it a group of teachers at a board meeting? Is it your fellow peers who know nothing about the subject, period? All of these questions you need to ask yourself when it comes to who are you writing this for. The F in RAFT stands for format. How are you presenting your ideas? Are you presenting them on a computer? Are you presenting them on a notebook? Are you perhaps presenting them in different document formats like a diary entry, a newspaper article? Are you perhaps writing some kind of account from the perspective of someone who, let's say for example, is writing a song, composing a resume? There are various components that you can write this down for a format. So another major thing you need to consider. And the T, the final component of this acronym, is topic. What is it about? You can have the audience down, you can have the format that you're writing it down in, you can have all the various components about how you're going to do it and why, but what is it about? The most important thing when composing a RAFT composed subject is, what are you writing? What is the main focal point that you're supposed to be focusing on here? So these are the things that make up RAFT. Now that we have the information around the acronym, how can you use RAFT? Allow me to demonstrate a diagram that I had drawn previously to the class today about a way that you can use RAFT for, in my case, social studies. I would like to present to you all here an example that I had prepped prior to this, and as you can see here on the video, I will of course read it off because I understand camera quality can be hard to decipher. So here's the initial presentation of how you divide it into a graph grid-like format. Now, the way that I ended up doing it was dividing it into 5 different categories, and this is something you need to consider. Now, the grading tool part of this, you students out there do not need to worry about this. That is for me or any other teacher out there who's grading these projects to worry about. But the things that you need to consider when you're doing this are, make a column for the role that you're going to be playing when you're conducting this discussion on any kind of topic. The audience that you're trying to appeal to for this time period, in which in my case social studies. The format, aka the way that you're going to be writing it, like a news article or a letter or something like that. And of course the topic itself, the most important component, or at least one of the most important components that you really need to consider. Let me read you off an example of what I had gone with for my RAFT activity. So the topic that I had covered was the Revolutionary War. And during these colonial times, how was I supposed to use RAFT to convey historical information but grasp understanding of the literary components present during that time period? So, allow me to read off a few examples to all of you. One thing I went with was the role was a journalist, someone during the colonial times who was writing about the escapades of George Washington, the British, and everything else going on during that time frame. My audience in this case were the people in Boston following the war effort, because newspapers were one of the central points of how people got their news and information back in those days, before your fancy cell phones and everything else that you guys have nowadays. The format was, of course, a news article. You're a journalist. You're someone who's supposed to be documenting and writing out this information during this time period. And the topic in this case is how the colonial army was defending Boston from the British invasion, which during this time, if you're a Boston journalist and you have high stakes when it comes to defending Boston, I mean, what else are you going to be doing during that time frame? These are important components that you need to recognize when it comes to being in this role. So this is one thing that you can do for the topic of the Revolutionary War. Another thing that I want to emphasize to you guys is, too, a more unique take, something else that you could possibly do. The role for this case would be a colonial soldier. The audience in this case is a bit different. George Washington and your fellow troops. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, how in the world could you possibly format this into a RAFT activity to convey historical information in a literary sense? That's where the letter part comes in for the format. Again, format in this case is very important, because when you think of being a soldier during the war, the last thing you're thinking of is demonstrating literary abilities, let's be honest here. So you're writing a persuasive letter. Now, this is a unique take for you students out there and anyone else who decides to conduct this activity. This is an activity that demonstrates your historical knowledge based on prior readings that you would have had in class, because the information that you're going to be writing about was not known until later on in the war, and by that point it was obviously too late, because the person in charge of this, they were long gone by that point. In this case, you're going to be trying to convince George Washington himself that fellow compatriot Benedict Arnold was a traitor, someone who turned against the colonial army and was feeding the British intelligence officers information crucial to winning the war. So, that is another unique take you can take with this RAFT activity. It is not just a format where you demonstrate knowledge of information that you've just read about and then do the activity with. This is also an activity that you can demonstrate knowledge in the time period that they wouldn't have known about. And you could demonstrate your forethought in this scenario as this soldier, and demonstrate your abilities that way as well. So these are a few examples that I have here that you could possibly do. Of course, the RAFT activity isn't just limited, even in the social science sense, to the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, presidencies, whatever topic you may want to think of. This activity can be used for just about anything in any subject. Before we move on, students, I'd like to give you a few more examples of some different content areas outside of social studies that you guys might be able to use in different subjects. So, a few of the ones that I have down here for you all, let's take math into consideration, one of the subjects that I had mentioned previously in the video. You can do things like, for the role, improper fractions. Your audience would be a mixed number. The format would be possibly something like a poem, or something along those lines. The topic could be something along the lines of, why is it okay to sometimes be improper? Consider these kinds of components. It doesn't have to be a straightforward literary component either. It's not a word-for-word memorization from the text. It can also be not just understanding how to read out a math problem in a math book, but the student's ability to put it into words and to understand how the problem works without necessarily writing down the equation. There are different ways this RAFT activity pushes students to know this information without outright having to do the math equation, if you catch my drift. So, I very much appreciate it, for example, because back in my youth, I was not a huge math professor. I tried doing it once at university. They kicked me out because 2 + 2 is 5. At least I thought it was, not the case anymore. The point is, for those of you who are competent in mathematics, this can be something that can help not only emphasize this knowledge, but increase your knowledge in the subject as well. Allow me to read you another example here from the science department. So, for example, the role would be you're an environmentalist. Your audience is a sector. Your format, you're giving a speech. The topic, you're protecting a rainforest. This allows you to go into different roles as well, even something in a field not specific to the general idea of science. In this case, you're going with environmental science, which deals with animals, plants, and life as a concept. This can greatly benefit you through those roles, as these speeches that you're giving are emphasizing a very important aspect of the ecosystem. In this case, a rainforest, which allows you to be more vocal in your points and allow the teacher and your fellow classmates to understand the knowledge that you've gained along the way. These are some strategies that you can implement with other subjects as well for this RAFT activity, and it can be greatly to your benefit to help you. Okay, so for a little bit of practice for you guys, I don't have any written documentation here for you, because honestly, the topic that I'm going to give you to demonstrate your knowledge of the RAFT activity, from what I've described so far, and from any personal experience you have of the topic, you guys should be able to easily just craft, use the back of your paper, perhaps bring out a piece of notebook paper, do something. Draw the graph that I described earlier and label role, audience, format, and topic into 4 different columns. From there, the topic that I'm going to give you is the Titanic. Now, the Titanic is a very specific and straightforward event when it comes to a historical sense, but there are different ways that you can break down being in different roles and demonstrate your literary knowledge. So, for example, you could be a journalist, is something I described earlier, writing a news article to the people of New York or wherever the destination was the Titanic was setting, talking about the disaster. In fact, you could place that anywhere in America during that time period, or even England. You could do it anywhere because it was a worldwide event. So you could be a journalist, you could be one of the passengers on the ship, writing a letter to your long-lost lover that you may not be able to make it home because the ship's slowly going down. Perhaps you have a tourist destination like the Titanic was last year. You're a news guy who's writing a brochure talking about this was where the Titanic was supposed to end up, or this was the harbor that the Titanic launched from, as a possible campaign to attract tourists there, because Titanic, major historical event, unfortunate tragedy, but great historic event. Those are 3 examples right off the bat here that you guys can use to formulate your own. So if you guys want to, feel free to stop the video, feel free to demonstrate your knowledge after the video is over, or perhaps do it while I've been talking here. Regardless of when you decide to do it, it is important, I think, that you demonstrate knowledge when it comes to doing this RAFT activity. The more you do it, the better you get with it. And it allows students, and in this case all of you, to be more progressive in your thinking, your learning, and instead of doing a test, you're demonstrating your knowledge through your own personality at the end of the day. Because this is based off of whatever you want to do. It's more fun that way. And it'll encourage more people to get involved, to read, to learn, and to write. And that is an important thing of this RAFT activity. Ladies and gentlemen, students, I would like to lead this off and end off the video with going over a few different ways that you guys could come up with some formats. I've listed a few here, but I would like to leave you off with a few more that you can consider for either future RAFT activities you do, or perhaps leading your own future students if you decide to pursue that career path, to possibly do their own. So allow me to lead you off with a few that I had listed here. You could do comic strips, diary entries. The Diary of Anne Frank comes to mind for something that even relates back to a diary entry. You could do a comic strip, something really cool to get students' creativity going, and even encourage some artistic drawing in there to add to the literary component, which is a big thing of modern-day comic books. You could do a greeting card of all things. As mundane as that might sound, a greeting card can play a major role, like at a famous wedding, for example, of a president. If there was something historically significant that happened at a formal event, a greeting card to invite someone to the event could really help emphasize how much you know about the pre-planning of the event itself. And menus, songs, wanted posters. There are so many formats that you can take. There is seemingly no limit to what you can do with this RAFT activity. The major things that you need to know are the subject matter, the format in which you're going to be doing it, considering what audience that you have going for it, and all in all, how passionate are you about this? Because if the students don't feel up to doing it, if they're not encouraged, if they're not into doing something creative, if they're writing papers constantly, if they're constantly churning out tests and quizzes, what enjoyment do the students have at the end of the day? So, I'd like to leave you off with that. And with everything I've discussed in this video, I hope you all gained an insider's knowledge into how this RAFT activity works, and hopefully in the future, again, if you pursue your own paths as teachers, or even just want to show it to a friend or a fellow classmate, please demonstrate this RAFT knowledge to the best of your abilities, because this is a fantastic activity to help students learn, grow, and become better with literacy. Thank you all so much for watching today's video. I very much do appreciate it. Let me know what you guys think about this through your writings and encourage each other to do better. Hopefully you guys are going to be fantastic people when it comes to doing these RAFT activities and great educators in the future. So that's all from me. This has been Mr. Bittner signing off, and I am going to return this water and get some alternative ones because this is disgusting. Take care, everybody.